In fact, MGTOW philosophy is so powerful it can also be very helpful to married men who can still benefit greatly from red pill values, starting by learning to say no to their wives and yes to their lives, rejecting any punishment for doing so for the abuse that it is, learning to say, if mama ain't happy, then mama needs to own her shit and live with the fact that the world does not revolve around her desires. The men's movement, MGTOW philosophy, red pill thinking, whatever you want to call it, is teaching men of all stripes to value themselves. It's showing us that one man at a time, all men can win this god-awful gender war, not by attacking women, but by taking responsibility for their decisions, by having healthy values, and by living by them even when there's a cost. Now, I know that some people will be listening to this with disappointment. They'll recognize, and rightly so, that the nuclear family has long been the backbone of a stable society. They know that the deterioration of the family unit is directly proportional to the deterioration of society. They will recognize, and just as rightly, that human beings are driven to pair bond, that generally speaking, we do not do as well flying solo as we do when meaningfully connected to others. They will lament all the loss that this represents, and once again, they'll be mostly on the mark. But what I think these people fail to see is that MGTOW isn't an attack on marriage. It's a response to the fact that marriage is now an attack on men. Marriage was broken fatally a long time before MGTOW started gaining its current popularity. It was broken by feminists with no-fault divorce policies that enabled women to steal men's children and their property simply because they wanted to. It was broken by corrupt family courts where the legal profession lines its pockets on the destruction of families. It was broken by traditionalists and their archaic, romantic, and frankly stupid illusions about love and the ridiculously lopsided and burdensome expectations that it places on men. Men walking away is the solution, not the problem. If the world wants other solutions, solutions that bring men back into the fold, it should work on them. Not just on fixing family law, but on ending female privilege and correcting the social contract. And it needs to provide a payoff for men, starting with a return to demonstrated respect and thanks for their contributions. Till that happens, which is a long way off, the only sane path for men is one that leads away from the insanity. Like I said, this is not going to be sweeping, pervasive change. The point that I'm making, though, is that each and every man within earshot of this talk, married or single, religious or not, straight or gay, of any race or creed, can use this movement, this way of thinking, to make his life infinitely better. We needn't wait for government or women or other men for that matter to do it for us. In fact, waiting for those kind of external forces to come to the aid of men and boys reflects a lack of understanding of the problems. And one last note on this very personal movement. Second-wave feminists, like all feminists, were wrong about nearly everything that ever issued from their mouths. You know that, or you would not likely be at this conference. Either that, or you're possibly a member of the fake news media here covering it. One thing that they did get right, though, they were fond of the notion that the personal is political, a hat tip to the fact that especially in the realm of sex-based issues, the politics of it is deeply, penetratingly personal. The difference is that for women, it meant a war against men. And to be frank, it means the same in reverse for many men new to the MRM, or to disaffected men who are stuck in irrational, unresolvable anger. For them, it's also a war against women. In reality, though, the men's movement is a war with ourselves. It's a war against our lack of values with women, against our gynocentric ways, and against our addiction to group consensus, to the world's abusive, dysfunctional notion of what makes a man. And you bet all of this is personal, and so are our answers, all staring at us right from the mirror when we dare to look. All this might have you thinking that any political solutions are pointless. That would certainly be the point of view of some men going their own way. They are simply exiting the system with no intention of looking back, and they tend to view political activism by MRAs as an effort to clean up the plantation so we can get men willingly to walk back onto it and into subservience. Of course, that is a largely emotional and irrational perspective. I, for one, have no intention of ever marrying, but I still want to do all I can to diminish the power of feminism, and would find nothing more gleeful than to gut its funding by pretty much any means necessary. That won't end gynocentrism or make modern marriage more palatable in the short run, but I do think we're at the point politically where we can do great damage to feminists. With the recent meteoric rise of populist movements across the globe, we have the real possibility to attack their funding, something that would ultimately serve humankind quite well. Left-wing universities, which is to say nearly all of them, produce an unending stream of gender zombies, embittered, brainwashed women, victocrats of privilege, and malleable, indoctrinated young men whose identity hinges on supporting and enabling the women who demonize them. Media pundits fret over imaginary wage gaps, fabricated epidemics of sexual assault, and will forever try to top each other in virtue signaling over the latest Me Too allegation. They will, some subtly and some not, all join in the outrage at men as the root cause of our social ills. Politicians in the public eye generally follow suit and stand by like sheep as all this happens. People who we used to call conservatives, now more accurately called quislings, mask their spinelessness behind a facade of religious dogma and so-called traditional conservative values. As we look at today's political climate, particularly on the left, we see politics gone feral. In America, we see thinly veiled calls for violence from political leaders, demands that we abolish border enforcement and borders themselves. We see congressmen getting gunned down while playing softball, and the unvarnished harassment of administration officials while simply trying to go about their daily lives. And we see a large part of the culture apparently willing to accept all this as the new normal. This is a direct result, in my opinion, of widespread father absence. Robbed of the discipline, humility, and empathy that fathers engender in children, they grow up noticeably lacking in those crucial qualities. Society suffers from it. That fatherlessness is not just an artifact of the left, though. For 50 years, conservatives have utterly failed to fight back against the left's anti-father, anti-family agenda. In fact, they've become complicit in those objectives. Why? Because conservative men aren't just weak with feminists. They're weak with women. So weak they won't fight back as their own sons and daughters, as well as their political objectives, are undermined and corrupted. On that level, even so-called conservative anti-feminists haven't made much of a difference. They've been entertaining, but ineffective. They are still self-censoring where it might upset women, which prevents the utterance of a multiple of critical truths. And many are still ultimately gynocentric and weak on the issues. They have lost the battle within themselves. Most of them have never even shown up. But that is undoubtedly changing. Populist movements are growing everywhere, fired up by people who are done with identity politics, including feminism. We've seen it in the UK with Brexit, even though the UK government is now working furiously to find a way to ignore the will of its people. The election of Donald Trump in America was much more than a shot across the bow. It was a political thermonuclear detonation. even an endless barrage of accusations that he's a misogynist that continue to this day. Normally, death for an American politician couldn't stop him. He gave them all the finger and won an electoral landslide. Politicians in Australia are starting to fight back too, with Senator David Langenhelm telling a rabid feminist senator to, quote, "fuck off," in response to her demonization of all men as rapists. When the Australian Prime Minister played the white knight card and demanded that Langenhelm apologize to her, Langenhelm called him, among other things, a pussy. Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. Therefore, anyone who tells you that the men's movement is politically irrelevant is out of touch with reality. Red pill men and women are poised to play a huge role in swinging upcoming elections, in furthering the political populism that can actually make a difference in policy and law. Right now, you're at a conference hosted by the founder of the first men's political party in the English-speaking world. Since the last conference he hosted in 2016, another has emerged in Scandinavia. If you look now at what is happening in Italy, India, Eastern Europe, Southern Germany, and America, all of which will hopefully inspire the UK to regain its momentum back toward sanity, you can see political opportunities that matter. And one of the greatest opportunities is the growing anti-feminist sentiment. And let us not mince words about this. The war against feminism is a war against the left, and a war against the left is a war against feminism. That is something I would not have dwelled on 10 years ago, given the hapless gynocentrism of the old right. But this is not 10 years ago, or even 5. This is a new day and a new age of disruptive populism. If you care about men's and boys' issues, you can help anti-feminists become more effective by educating them about men's issues as well as expanding their knowledge of the mendacity of feminism. Enlighten the anti-feminists. Use them. But do not be fooled into confusing them with advocates for men and boys who fit into our movement. There are already some who claim to support our ideas, but whose actual motive is to create men and boys who are once again useful to women. These are frequently, but not always, women. They will mock third-wave feminism, often delightfully. They are entertaining and sometimes even enchanting. But at the core of their philosophy is the old dysfunctional social contract, complete with men's purpose being utility to women. These people can make convenient allies and are often quite useful in the big political picture. But this movement and the world at large still needs what it is woefully short of: advocates for men and boys, not cheerleaders for white knights, not champions for traditional values, not women who pine for the days when men were men and women were idle. Not proponents for a toxic social contract between men and women, but true advocates who focus on the needs, wants, problems, aspirations, and dreams of men and boys. People who see men and boys as having intrinsic worth. People who encourage men and boys to see their intrinsic worth. People who understand that for women, real equality is a step down from their current station in life. And we need to know, all of us, that a gynocentric core, no matter how well-intentioned, is a disqualifier for that advocacy. Remember, not every anti-feminist is Janice Fiamingo. In fact, most of them aren't. Finally, I'd like to end this talk as I started it, with some thanks for all the people who made this conference possible. To all of you for attending, but especially to those of you in the audience who are more than just anti-feminists. All of you who know that trouncing feminists in the arena of ideas is like winning a foot race against a paraplegic. Those who move past the simplistic pastime of anti-feminism to take a stand for men and boys in this world, even when it makes anti-feminists uncomfortable. even when it makes everyone uncomfortable. I ask you, wonderful warriors, to please keep making people feel uncomfortable, to keep reminding a world that does not want to hear it that men are human beings. Thank you.